I'm Sophia Chen, 28 years old, and I never thought my own family would ban me from my father's 60th birthday party because they were embarrassed by my financial situation. When my stepmother Patricia coldly informed me that my presence would be, quote, inappropriate given the guest list, I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. But what happened when I showed up anyway with a surprise that would change everything? Well, let's just say their shock was worth every tear I'd shed over the past 3 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the daughter of Marcus Chen, I always knew money was important in our household, but I never imagined it would become the weapon my family would use to exclude me from the most significant moments of our lives. My father built Chen Industries from the ground up, starting with a small importing business in our garage, and eventually creating a multi-million-dollar empire that specialized in luxury home furnishings. For the first 25 years of my life, I was Marcus Chen's little princess, the apple of his eye, destined to inherit not just his wealth but his business acumen. Everything changed when my mother Elena passed away from cancer 3 years ago. Within 6 months of her funeral, my father had married Patricia Whitmore, a woman 15 years his junior, who came from old money and had very specific ideas about social status and appearances. Patricia brought her own daughter Madison into our family, a 24-year-old socialite who had never worked a day in her life, but somehow managed to secure a position as brand director at Chen Industries, with a salary that made my eyes water. The transformation in my father was gradual but unmistakable. The man who had once praised my independence and my decision to pursue my own career in nonprofit work began questioning my choices with increasing frequency. When I chose to work at the Riverside Community Center, helping underprivileged families navigate social services, Patricia would purse her lips and make comments about wasted potential and playing in the dirt with those people. My father, who had once been proud of my master's degree in social work, started suggesting I consider more practical career options. The first major crack in our relationship came when I refused Patricia's offer to set me up with appropriate young men from her social circle. I had been dating Miguel Rodriguez for 2 years, a dedicated teacher who worked at an inner-city school and coached soccer on weekends. Miguel came from a humble background, his parents having immigrated from El Salvador when he was 5 years old. He was the first in his family to graduate college, and his passion for education and helping kids reminded me why I had chosen my own career path. But to Patricia, Miguel was unacceptable, because he drove a 10-year-old Honda and lived in what she called the wrong part of town. The criticism became relentless. Family dinners turned into interrogations about my life choices and lectures about maintaining standards. Patricia would make subtle digs about my clothing, pointing out that my department store dresses looked tired compared to Madison's designer outfits. She questioned my apartment in the Arts District, calling it bohemian, in a tone that made it sound like a disease. Even my job became a constant source of disapproval, with Patricia suggesting that I was wasting my education and that my work was more of a hobby than a career. My father, who had once been my biggest supporter, began echoing Patricia's concerns. The man who had taught me that success meant making a difference in the world started asking why I couldn't find a position at a reputable organization that paid better. When I explained that my work at the community center was fulfilling and that I was making a real impact on families' lives, he would sigh and shake his head, as if I were a child who refused to understand basic mathematics. The final blow came 6 months ago during what was supposed to be a celebration dinner for my promotion to program director at the community center. I had worked incredibly hard for the position, expanding our services to include job training programs and financial literacy classes that had helped over 200 families in just 1 year. I was proud of what I had accomplished, and I naively thought my family would be proud too. Instead, Patricia spent the entire dinner critiquing the restaurant I had chosen, claiming it was too casual for a family celebration. She made pointed comments about the other diners, suggesting that we were slumming it by eating at a place where the entrees cost less than $30. When I tried to share my excitement about the new programs I would be overseeing, Madison interrupted to announce that she had just been promoted to regional brand director, a position that came with a company car and an expense account that probably exceeded my annual salary. The conversation quickly shifted to Madison's achievements, her upcoming vacation to the French Riviera, and her plans to redecorate her company-provided condo. My promotion was forgotten, dismissed as if it were a participation trophy rather than the result of years of dedicated work and genuine impact on my community. That night, driving home to my modest apartment, I realized that I had become an embarrassment to my own family. Not because of anything I had done wrong, but because I had chosen a different definition of success than the one they valued. I had prioritized purpose over profit, impact over income, and that made me a disappointment in their eyes. The distance between us grew wider over the following months. I started declining family dinners, tired of the constant criticism and the feeling that I was being judged for every aspect of my life. When I did attend family gatherings, I felt like an outsider looking in on a world that no longer had room for me. Patricia and Madison would discuss their shopping trips to exclusive boutiques, their plans for expensive vacations, and their connections in high society, while I sat quietly, knowing that any contribution I made to the conversation would be met with subtle condescension or outright dismissal. The breaking point came 3 weeks before my father's 60th birthday. I had been planning to give him something special, something that would show him how much our relationship meant to me despite our recent difficulties. I had commissioned a local artist to create a custom photo collage that traced the history of Chen Industries, from its humble beginnings in our garage to its current success. The piece included photos of my father's first delivery truck, newspaper clippings from when he won small business awards, and images from company milestones that I had helped document over the years. It was a tribute to his incredible journey and a reminder of the values he had instilled in me about hard work and perseverance. I called Patricia to ask about the party plans, offering to help with any arrangements and assuming that, despite our differences, I would obviously be included in this milestone celebration. Her response left me speechless. "Oh, Sophia," she said in that saccharine tone she used when delivering particularly cutting remarks, "I'm afraid that won't be possible. Your father and I have decided to keep the guest list quite exclusive this year. We're hosting at the country club, and honestly, given the type of people who will be attending, your presence might be a bit awkward." I felt the air leave my lungs as her words sank in. "What do you mean? My presence would be awkward? He's my father." "Well, yes, technically," Patricia replied, "but you have to understand that this is a very important social event for your father's business. We're expecting investors, board members, and several prominent families from the community. Everyone will be discussing business opportunities and making important connections. You would feel out of place, and frankly, it would be embarrassing for your father to have to explain why."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
His daughter chose such a different lifestyle. The cruelty of her words was breathtaking. She was essentially telling me that I was too poor, too unsuccessful, too embarrassing to be seen at my own father's birthday party. "Have you discussed this with my father?" I asked, hoping against hope that this was Patricia's decision alone. "Of course," she replied smoothly. "Marcus agrees that it's for the best. Madison suggested that perhaps you could take your father to dinner on another day, somewhere more appropriate to your budget. I'm sure he would appreciate a nice gesture within your means." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. She was offering me a consolation prize, a chance to celebrate my father's birthday at a level she deemed suitable for someone of my limited financial resources. The woman who had married into our family was now deciding who belonged and who didn't, and I had been deemed unworthy. I hung up the phone and cried for 3 hours straight. The little girl who had once sat on her father's lap while he explained business deals was now too embarrassing to be seen at his birthday party. The daughter who had helped him celebrate every milestone in his career was being excluded from one of the most important moments of his life because my income didn't meet the family's new standards. For days, I wrestled with what to do. Part of me wanted to accept their decision, to take their advice and plan a separate, smaller celebration that wouldn't threaten their carefully curated image. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the man my father used to be, refused to go quietly. This wasn't just about a birthday party. It was about whether I was going to allow myself to be erased from my own family because I had chosen a different path. I thought about all the times my father had told me that success wasn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touched and the difference you made. I remembered how proud he had been when I graduated with my master's degree, how he had bragged to his friends about my academic achievements, and my commitment to helping others. That man wouldn't have banned his daughter from his birthday party because she chose social work over business. But that man had been replaced by someone who valued appearances over authenticity, someone who had allowed his new wife to reshape not just his home but his values. The question was whether any part of the father I remembered still existed beneath the surface, and whether it was worth fighting to reach him. As the day of the party approached, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to accept their judgment quietly. I wasn't going to let them erase me from this important moment in my father's life. And I certainly wasn't going to let them continue believing that my choices had made me a failure. What they didn't know was that my work at the community center had caught the attention of some very influential people. What they didn't know was that my unsuccessful career had led to opportunities they couldn't have imagined. What they didn't know was that while they were measuring my worth by my salary and my zip code, others were measuring it by my impact and my integrity. The irony was that Patricia's social circle, the very people she was so desperate to impress, included several philanthropists and community leaders who knew my work intimately. The important connections she was worried about me embarrassing were people who had personally thanked me for the programs I had developed and the families I had helped. 3 days before the party, I received a phone call that would give me the ammunition I needed to challenge their assumptions about my worth and my place in the world. The caller was Dr. Sarah Williams, the president of the Community Foundation, an organization that provided grants to nonprofits throughout our region. Her foundation was one of the most respected charitable organizations in the state, with a board that included some of the wealthiest and most influential people in our community. Sophia, Dr. Williams said, "I have some incredible news. Your application for the Innovation in Social Services grant has been approved. Not only are you receiving the full amount you requested, but the board was so impressed with your work that they want to feature your programs as a model for other communities." The grant was for $500,000, more money than I had ever imagined having access to. But more than the money, it was recognition from the highest levels of our community that my work mattered, that my programs were making a difference, and that my approach to social services was innovative and effective. "There's more," Dr. Williams continued. "The board would like to offer you a position as Director of Community Initiatives. It would mean overseeing grant distribution for the entire region and developing new programs to address poverty and social inequality. The salary would be quite competitive, and you would have the resources to expand your work on a much larger scale." The position came with a salary that was 3 times what I was making at the community center, plus benefits that included a company car and a professional development budget. More importantly, it was an opportunity to impact thousands of families instead of hundreds, to influence policy at the state level, and to work with the most respected philanthropists and community leaders in our region. But the best part was yet to come. Dr. Williams mentioned that the foundation was hosting a reception the following evening to announce the grant recipients and introduce the new staff members. The event would be attended by major donors, community leaders, and business executives who supported the foundation's work. "I hope you can attend," she said. "Several board members are eager to meet you in person, and there will be some wonderful networking opportunities with people who are passionate about the same issues you're addressing." As I accepted her invitation and hung up the phone, a plan began forming in my mind. The reception was being held at the same country club where my father's birthday party would take place the following evening. Many of the same people who would be at my father's party would be at the foundation reception, people who would now know my name and my work. I spent the next day shopping for something appropriate to wear to both events, finally settling on an elegant navy dress that was professional enough for the foundation reception, but sophisticated enough for a birthday party. For the first time in months, I felt confident about my choices and my worth. The foundation reception exceeded my expectations. Dr. Williams introduced me to board members who praised my innovative approaches to social work and asked detailed questions about my programs. Several wealthy philanthropists expressed interest in supporting my work, and one major donor mentioned that he was planning to recommend my programs to other foundations across the country. The validation was overwhelming after months of being made to feel like a failure by my own family. These were successful, influential people who valued my work and respected my expertise. They saw my career choice not as a disappointment, but as a calling that required both intelligence and courage. During the reception, I overheard several attendees discussing their plans for the following evening. "I'm looking forward to Marcus Chen's party tomorrow," one woman said. "Patricia always throws such elegant events." Another guest mentioned that he was hoping to discuss a potential collaboration between his company and Chen Industries. I realized that many of the people who would be judging my worthiness at my father's party already knew my work and respected my achievements. The irony was delicious, and gave me the confidence I needed for what I was planning to do. The next evening, I stood outside the country club where my father's 60th birthday party was in full swing. Through the tall windows, I could see the elegant crowd that Patricia had assembled. The same people who had applauded my work just 24 hours earlier. The only difference was that tonight they would see me not as Sophia Chen, the respected social worker and grant recipient, but as the daughter who had been deemed too embarrassing to invite. I took a deep breath, clutched the custom photo collage I had created for my father, and walked through the front doors. It was time to show my family exactly what they had been so ashamed of, and to remind my father of the daughter he had raised, before Patricia convinced him to value money over meaning. What happened next would either reunite my family or end my relationship with them forever. But either way, I was done hiding my light under a bushel and pretending that my achievements didn't matter. Tonight, they would see exactly who Sophia Chen had become, and they would have to decide whether they wanted to be part of her future. The moment I stepped into the ballroom, conversations stopped. Patricia's face went pale as she spotted me across the room, her carefully orchestrated evening suddenly disrupted by the presence of the daughter she had worked so hard to exclude. Madison looked mortified, as if my mere presence might somehow taint her by association. But the reactions I was most interested in came from the other guests. Dr. Williams spotted me immediately and approached with a warm smile, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room as she greeted me. "Sophia? How wonderful to see you again so soon. I was just telling the Hendersons about your remarkable work at the community center." The ripple effect was immediate and visible. Heads turned, recognition dawned on faces, and suddenly the woman Patricia had deemed too embarrassing to invite was being approached by some of the most influential people in the room. People who knew my work, respected my achievements, and valued my contributions to their community. My father stood frozen by the bar, his expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been pride. For the first time in 3 years, he was seeing his daughter through other people's eyes, instead of through Patricia's filter of disappointment and shame. The evening was far from over, and the biggest surprises were yet to come. But standing in that ballroom, surrounded by people who valued my work and respected my choices, I finally felt like I belonged exactly where I was. The question was whether my family would finally see what everyone else already knew about the woman I had become. The silence that followed Dr. Williams' greeting seemed to stretch on forever, though it probably lasted only seconds. I watched as recognition dawned on face after face throughout the elegant ballroom. These weren't strangers looking at an intruder. These were colleagues, donors, and community leaders who knew exactly who I was and what I had accomplished. Mrs. Henderson, wife of the city's most prominent real estate developer, approached me with genuine warmth. "Sophia, dear, congratulations on the foundation grant. Richard and I were so impressed when Dr. Williams told us about your innovative housing assistance program. We've been hoping to discuss how our development company might partner with your organization." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a woman whose husband probably did millions of dollars in business with Chen Industries, praising the very work that Patricia had dismissed as playing in the dirt with poor people. I could see Patricia's carefully constructed facade beginning to crack, as she realized that her social circle didn't share her disdain for my career choices. Judge Margaret Foster joined our conversation, her presence commanding immediate respect throughout the room. "Sophia, I've been following your work with the family court system. Your advocacy program has made a real difference in how we handle custody cases involving domestic violence. The legal community has taken notice." More guests gravitated toward our growing circle, each offering congratulations or sharing how my work had impacted their own charitable endeavors. Patricia stood frozen across the room, her face cycling between confusion and dawning horror as she watched her carefully planned evening slip out of her control. My father remained by the bar, but I could feel his eyes on me as the most influential people at his party gathered around his daughter. The daughter he had allowed to be excluded from this very event. The daughter whose achievements were apparently well known to everyone except her own family. Madison appeared at Patricia's side, whispering urgently in her stepmother's ear. I couldn't hear their conversation, but Madison's panicked expression suggested she was beginning to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation. They had painted me as an embarrassment, a failure whose presence would diminish their social standing. Instead, I was being celebrated by the very people they were trying to impress. Dr. Williams continued to sing my praises to anyone within earshot, describing the innovative approaches I had developed for addressing homelessness and the measurable impact my programs had achieved. Sophia's work with transitional housing has become a model for other cities. She explained to a group that included 2 city council members and the president of the Chamber of Commerce. We're already fielding calls from organizations across the country who want to replicate her programs. The validation was intoxicating after months of being made to feel like a disappointment by my own family. These successful, influential people saw value in my work and respected my expertise. They understood that choosing to help others wasn't a character flaw or a sign of limited ambition, but rather a demonstration of intelligence, compassion, and leadership. As the evening progressed, I found myself at the center of multiple conversations about social policy, community development, and philanthropic initiatives. Business leaders who had never spoken to me at previous family gatherings were now seeking my opinion on how their companies could better support local nonprofits. Wealthy philanthropists were asking about my expansion plans and offering resources to help me reach more families. The transformation in how I was perceived was dramatic and immediate. One moment I was the black sheep of the family, too poor and unsuccessful to deserve a place at this gathering. The next moment I was being treated as an expert, a leader, and a valuable member of the community. Patricia attempted to regain control of her narrative by inserting herself into conversations, but her efforts only highlighted how out of touch she was with the community's values. When she tried to steer a discussion toward more superficial topics like fashion or vacation destinations, the guests politely redirected the conversation back to substantive issues like affordable housing and educational equity. "Patricia, dear," said Mrs. Carmichael, whose family foundation was one of the largest in the state, "you must be so proud of Sophia's work. We've been watching her programs with great interest, and frankly, we're impressed by her innovative approach to systemic problems." Patricia's smile looked pained as she struggled to respond appropriately. She could hardly admit that she had been actively discouraging my career choices and had tried to exclude me from this very party. Instead, she offered a weak, "Yes, of course, we're very proud," while shooting concerned glances toward my father. The most satisfying moment came when Robert Morrison, the state's wealthiest tech entrepreneur and a major donor to conservative causes, approached me with obvious respect. "Sophia, I wanted to personally thank you for the work you've done with veteran housing. My nephew went through your program last year after struggling with PTSD and homelessness. You literally saved his life." The room fell silent as Morrison continued his praise, his voice carrying the weight of genuine emotion. When people ask me about effective charitable giving, I tell them to look at outcomes, not intentions. Your programs deliver real results. That's rare in the nonprofit world. I could see my father's expression changing as he listened to Morrison's words. This was a man whose opinion Marcus valued highly, someone whose business advice he sought, and whose approval he coveted. Hearing Morrison praise his daughter's work was clearly having an impact that months of my own explanations had failed to achieve. The evening took another dramatic turn when Dr. Williams called for everyone's attention. Standing near the small stage where a string quartet had been playing background music, she raised her champagne glass and smiled at the assembled crowd. "I hope you'll indulge me for just a moment," she began, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom. "I know we're here to celebrate Marcus Chen's birthday, but I can't resist taking this opportunity to share some exciting news about someone who has made our community immeasurably better." My heart began racing as I realized what was happening. Dr. Williams was about to make my recent achievements public in front of everyone who had ever doubted my choices, including my own family. Many of you know Sophia Chen through her groundbreaking work at the Riverside Community Center. Dr. Williams continued. What you might not know is that she recently received the largest grant in our foundation's history to expand her innovative programs throughout the region. Gasps and murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. I caught sight of Madison's horrified expression as she began to understand the implications of what was being announced. But that's not all. Dr. Williams smiled directly at me. Sophia has also accepted our offer to become the Foundation's new Director of Community Initiatives, a position that will allow her to influence social policy at the state level and oversee millions of dollars in grant funding. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. I found myself surrounded by congratulatory embraces and offers of future collaboration. The woman who had been deemed too embarrassing to invite to this party was now being celebrated as one of the most influential social advocates in the region. My father approached slowly, his face a complex mixture of pride, confusion, and what might have been shame. "Sophia," he said quietly when he reached my side, "I had no idea about any of this." "I tried to tell you," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. "Every time I talked about my work, you dismissed it as idealistic nonsense. Every time I shared my achievements, you changed the subject to more practical concerns." He winced at the accuracy of my words. "I thought you were wasting your education, your potential. I didn't understand that this kind of work could be so significant." "Significant to whom?" I asked pointedly. "It was always significant to the families I was helping. It just wasn't significant to you, because it didn't come with a prestigious title or a six-figure salary." Dr. Williams appeared at my father's shoulder, clearly having overheard our conversation. "Mr. Chen, you should know that your daughter is considered one of the most innovative social policy experts in the country. We've had inquiries from foundations in New York and California who want to recruit her." My father's eyes widened as the full implications of what he had been dismissing became clear. His daughter wasn't just doing good work, she was a nationally recognized expert, whose talents were being sought by organizations across the country. "Sophia has turned down several lucrative offers to stay here and continue building her programs in our community," Dr. Williams added. "We're fortunate to have someone of her caliber choosing to make a difference here rather than pursuing opportunities in larger markets." The revelation that I had been sought after by other organizations seemed to stun my father. He had been viewing my career as a series of limitations and disappointments, never realizing that I had been choosing to stay in our community rather than accepting more prestigious positions elsewhere. Patricia finally approached our group, her face pale and her usual composure noticeably shaken. "Sophia, I had no idea about your recent accomplishments. Perhaps we should have discussed your career more thoroughly before you decided I was too embarrassing to attend my own father's birthday party?" I interrupted, my voice carrying just enough volume to be heard by the nearby guests. The silence that followed was deafening. Several prominent community members exchanged meaningful glances, clearly processing the implications of what I had just revealed. These were people who valued family loyalty and would be appalled by the idea of excluding a daughter from such an important celebration. Mrs. Henderson was the first to break the silence. "Surely there's been some misunderstanding," she said, looking between Patricia and my father with obvious concern. "No one would exclude their own daughter from a family celebration." Patricia's face flushed red as she struggled to find an explanation that wouldn't completely destroy her social standing. "It was just, the guest list was quite limited and we thought—" "You thought what, exactly?" I pressed, unwilling to let her deflect responsibility for her actions. My father stepped forward, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine regret. "We made a mistake, Sophia. A terrible mistake. I allowed myself to be convinced that your choices reflected poorly on our family, when clearly the opposite is true." The admission was more than I had expected from him, but it also highlighted how completely he had abandoned his own judgment in favor of Patricia's social anxieties. The man who had built a successful business through his own hard work and determination had somehow forgotten to value those same qualities in his own daughter. Judge Foster, who had been listening to our exchange with obvious disapproval, addressed my father directly. "Marcus, I hope you realize how fortunate you are to have a daughter who has chosen to dedicate her life to serving others. In my experience, that kind of character is far more valuable than any amount of money or social status. Her words carried the weight of authority and moral judgment that clearly affected my father. This was a woman whose opinion mattered in our community, and her implicit criticism of his treatment of me was not something he could easily dismiss or rationalize away. The crowd began to disperse slightly as people processed what they had witnessed, but many guests made a point of approaching me personally to offer congratulations and express their support. The contrast between their warmth and my family's rejection was stark and painful. Dr. Williams remained by my side, serving as both a professional ally and a buffer against my family's discomfort. "Sophia, I hope tonight has demonstrated how much your community values your work," she said loud enough for my father and Patricia to hear. "We're lucky to have leaders like you who are willing to tackle our most challenging social problems." As the evening continued, I found myself in surreal conversations with people who had attended my father's party expecting to network and socialize, but who instead found themselves discussing policy solutions and community initiatives. The party Patricia had planned as a showcase for her husband's business success had inadvertently become a celebration of his daughter's social impact. The irony was almost overwhelming. Patricia had excluded me because she feared I would embarrass the family in front of their social circle. Instead, my absence would have been the real embarrassment, depriving them of the opportunity to be associated with someone their community clearly respected and admired. My father made several attempts throughout the evening to pull me aside for private conversation, but I wasn't ready for that level of intimacy. The wounds from months of rejection and criticism were too fresh, and his sudden change in attitude felt more like damage control than genuine recognition of his mistakes. Instead, I focused on the positive connections I was making with other guests, people who were eager to discuss collaboration opportunities and potential partnerships. By the time the evening began winding down, I had collected more business cards and invitations than I could have imagined, along with promises of support for my expanded programs. Madison approached me near the end of the party, her demeanor significantly more humble than it had been in months. "Sophia, I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I supported the decision to exclude you tonight, and I was wrong. I didn't understand what you had accomplished or how respected you are in the community." Her apology felt genuine, though I suspected it was motivated more by social calculation than moral insight. Madison had witnessed how my presence elevated rather than diminished our family's standing, and she was smart enough to realize that she had been on the wrong side of this conflict. "I appreciate that," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "But understand that this isn't just about tonight. This is about months of being made to feel like a failure and a disappointment by my own family." She nodded, her eyes reflecting what might have been genuine remorse. "I know it's not enough, but I hope we can find a way to move forward. Tonight showed me that I have a lot to learn from you." The conversation was interrupted by Patricia's approach, her face showing the strain of an evening that had gone completely contrary to her expectations. "Sophia, I think we need to discuss what happened tonight," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "What happened tonight," I replied, "is that your community discovered what you chose to ignore. My work matters to these people. My achievements are recognized and respected by everyone except my own family." Patricia's composure finally cracked slightly. "I never meant to diminish your accomplishments. I simply thought that a different career path might offer you more security." "Security?" I laughed, the sound carrying a bitter edge. "I just accepted a position that comes with more responsibility and influence than most people achieve in their entire careers. I'm overseeing millions of dollars in funding and shaping policy that affects thousands of families. How is that insecure?" The question hung in the air between us, highlighting the fundamental disconnect between her values and mine. To Patricia, security meant social status and financial wealth. To me, it meant meaningful work and the respect of my peers and community. My father rejoined our conversation, looking older than he had at the beginning of the evening. "Sophia, I need you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I may not have understood it before tonight, but I see now how wrong I was to question your choices." His words were what I had been hoping to hear for years, but they came too late and under circumstances that made their sincerity questionable. Dad, you raised me to believe that success meant making a positive difference in the world. You taught me that character mattered more than wealth, and that helping others was the highest calling. Then you married Patricia and suddenly forgot all of those lessons. The accusation was harsh but accurate, and his face showed that he recognized the truth in my words. Your mother would be ashamed of how I've treated you, he admitted quietly. She would have been proud of your work from the beginning. The mention of my mother brought tears to my eyes, but also strengthened my resolve. She taught me to stand up for what I believe in, and to never apologize for choosing compassion over profit. I wish you had remembered those lessons too. As the last guests began to leave, offering final congratulations and promises to stay in touch, I realized that the evening had fundamentally changed my relationship with my family. They could no longer dismiss my work as insignificant or paint my choices as failures. The community they desperately wanted to impress had clearly demonstrated their respect for my achievements and their disapproval of how I had been treated. But the damage to our relationships ran deeper than professional recognition could heal. Trust, once broken, would take time and genuine effort to rebuild. Words of apology, however sincere, couldn't erase months of rejection and criticism. Dr. Williams approached me as I prepared to leave, her expression showing both professional satisfaction and personal concern. Sophia, tonight was quite something. I hope it helps your family understand what the rest of us have known all along about your value and importance. I think it opened some eyes, I replied diplomatically. Whether it changes anything long-term remains to be seen. She nodded understandingly. Change is often a slow process, especially when it involves admitting fundamental mistakes. But tonight was definitely a step in the right direction. As I walked to my car, still clutching the photo collage I had created for my father but never had the chance to present, I reflected on the evening's events. I had achieved the vindication I had sought, proving that my choices were respected and valued by the community my family cared so much about impressing. But victory felt hollow when it came at the cost of family relationships that might never fully recover. The little girl who had once idolized her father and dreamed of making him proud had finally earned his respect, but only after losing his love and trust along the way. The real question now was whether recognition of my achievements could bridge the gap that had opened between us, or whether the damage done by months of rejection and dismissal was too severe to overcome. The party was over, but the hard work of rebuilding our family was just beginning. As I drove home through the quiet streets of our city, I knew that everything had changed. My family could no longer pretend that my choices had been mistakes, or that my work was insignificant. They had seen the respect I commanded in our community, and the impact I was making on countless lives. Whether they would choose to embrace this new understanding, or find new ways to rationalize their previous behavior remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. I would never again allow anyone to make me feel ashamed of the work I had chosen, or the difference I was making in the world. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity, as news of my new position spread throughout the professional community. My phone rang constantly with congratulations, interview requests from local media outlets, and invitations to speak at conferences across the region. The contrast between this recognition and my family's previous dismissal was both validating and emotionally exhausting. My father called twice during this period, both times leaving carefully worded voicemails that expressed his desire to make things right without explicitly acknowledging the depth of his mistakes. I wasn't ready to respond to his overtures, still processing the pain of having been excluded from his celebration and the years of criticism that had preceded it. The new role at the Community Foundation required an immediate transition, and I threw myself into the work with renewed energy. My first week involved meeting with foundation board members, reviewing existing grant programs, and developing strategies for expanding our impact throughout the region. The work was challenging and fulfilling, in ways that my previous position, despite its importance, had never been. Dr. Williams proved to be an exceptional mentor, introducing me to influential philanthropists and policymakers who could amplify our program's reach. During one particularly productive meeting with state legislators, she pulled me aside to discuss an opportunity that would reshape my entire career trajectory. "Sophia, I've been contacted by the Rockefeller Foundation," she said, her voice carrying barely contained excitement. "They're looking for someone to lead a new national initiative on innovative approaches to poverty reduction. Your work here has caught their attention, and they want to discuss bringing you to New York to head the program." The offer was staggering in its scope and potential. The Rockefeller Foundation was one of the most prestigious philanthropic organizations in the world, with resources that could scale my programs to help millions of families across the country. The position would come with a salary that exceeded anything I had ever imagined, along with the opportunity to influence social policy at the highest levels of government. "It would mean leaving everything you've built here," Dr. Williams continued, "but it would also mean taking your innovative approaches to a national platform. Think of the impact you could have." As I drove home that evening, my mind raced with the possibilities. This was the kind of opportunity that social workers dreamed about, but rarely achieved. It would validate everything I had worked toward and provide resources to help more families than I could ever reach from our regional foundation. But it would also mean leaving the community where I had grown up, the programs I had personally developed, and any chance of rebuilding my relationship with my father. The decision felt overwhelming in its implications for both my career and my personal life. That same evening, I found Miguel waiting outside my apartment building with takeout from our favorite restaurant and a bottle of wine. Over the past weeks, he had been my emotional anchor, listening patiently as I processed the complex feelings surrounding my family's treatment and subsequent recognition of my work. "You look like someone who has big news," he said as we settled onto my couch with dinner. "Good news or complicated news?" "Both," I replied, then shared the details of the Rockefeller Foundation opportunity. Miguel listened without interruption, his expression shifting between excitement for my potential and concern about what the offer might mean for our relationship. "This is incredible, Sophia," he said finally. "This is exactly the kind of recognition your work deserves. But I have to ask what it means for us." The question hung in the air between us, highlighting the complexity of balancing personal relationships with professional opportunities. Miguel's teaching career was deeply rooted in our community, and his family connections made relocating to New York challenging if not impossible. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "I haven't made any decisions yet. There are so many factors to consider, including your family," he pointed out gently. "I know things have been difficult with your father, but tonight's events opened a door that might not stay open forever." His observation forced me to confront the reality that accepting the New York position would effectively end any possibility of rebuilding my relationship with my father. Despite everything that had happened, some part of me still hoped that we could find our way back to the connection we had shared before Patricia's influence changed our family dynamics. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I opened my apartment door to find my father standing in the hallway, looking more uncertain than I had ever seen him. He held a small, wrapped package, and wore the expression of someone who had been practicing what to say but had forgotten his rehearsed words. "Sophia, may I come in?" he asked quietly. "I know I don't deserve it, but I was hoping we could talk." I hesitated, still raw from weeks of emotional turmoil, but ultimately stepped aside to let him enter. He looked around my apartment with obvious curiosity, taking in details he had never bothered to notice during his previous dismissive comments about my living situation. "This is lovely," he said, examining the artwork I had collected from local artists and the bookshelves filled with professional journals and literary classics. "I never really looked before. I mean, I visited, but I never really saw what you had created here." The admission was small but significant, acknowledging his previous blindness to aspects of my life that reflected my values and interests. He settled onto my couch with obvious discomfort, clearly struggling with how to begin a conversation that was years overdue. "I brought you something," he said, offering the wrapped package. "It belonged to your mother. I should have given it to you long ago." Inside the wrapping was a small leather journal, worn soft with age and filled with my mother's handwriting. As I flipped through the pages, I realized it was a record of my childhood achievements and milestones, documented in her careful script with obvious pride and love. First steps at 11 months. I read aloud from one entry. Sophia walked straight to the bookshelf, as if she knew exactly where she wanted to go. Another entry described my first day of kindergarten. She insisted on walking herself to the classroom door. independent and confident, just like I hope she'll always be. Tears filled my eyes as I continued reading, discovering my mother's hopes and dreams for my future. On the final written page, dated just weeks before her death, she had written, "Sophia has such a compassionate heart. I hope she finds a way to use that gift to help others, regardless of what the world tells her about success and failure." She saw it even then. My father said quietly, "Your calling to help people." I lost sight of that after she died, and I'm sorry. The apology was more direct than anything he had offered before, but it also opened wounds that had never properly healed. "Dad, you didn't just lose sight of it. You actively discouraged it. You made me feel like my choices were wrong, like I was disappointing you by following the very values you and Mom taught me." He nodded heavily, accepting the criticism without defensiveness. "Patricia convinced me that I was protecting you, steering you toward a more secure future. But she was wrong, and I was wrong to listen to her instead of trusting what I knew about your character." "It wasn't just about Patricia," I replied, needing him to understand the full scope of what had happened. "You chose to value her opinions over mine. You chose to dismiss my achievements because they didn't fit her definition of success. You chose to exclude me from your birthday party because you were embarrassed by the daughter you raised." The words were harsh but necessary, forcing him to confront the choices he had made rather than hiding behind excuses about Patricia's influence. His face showed pain, but also recognition of the truth in my accusations. "You're right," he said simply. "I made those choices, and they were wrong. I hurt you badly, and I don't know if I can ever make that right." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of years of misunderstanding and hurt hanging between us. Finally, my father spoke again, his voice careful and tentative. "I heard about the offer from New York," he said. "Dr. Williams mentioned it to Robert Morrison, who told me. It sounds like an incredible opportunity. I was surprised that news of the Rockefeller Foundation offer had already reached him through the community network. But I shouldn't have been. Our city's elite circles were small and interconnected, with information traveling quickly among influential families." "It is," I confirmed. "It would mean taking everything I've learned here and applying it on a national scale. The impact could be enormous. And it would mean leaving," he observed quietly. "Leaving your programs here, your community, your family." The last word carried particular weight, acknowledging that despite our recent conflicts, I was still his daughter, and my absence would be a loss he would feel deeply. For the first time in our conversation, I heard genuine emotion in his voice rather than just regret or guilt. "That's one consideration," I replied carefully. "There are many factors to weigh. Sophia, I need you to know that whatever you decide, I support it completely," he said, his voice strengthening with conviction. "If you choose to stay and continue building your work here, I'll do everything I can to support your programs. And if you choose to take the position in New York, I'll be proud to tell everyone that my daughter is leading national efforts to address poverty and inequality." The promise meant more than I had expected it to, especially coming from someone whose approval I had craved for so long. But it also highlighted how much had changed between us. A year ago, his support would have been everything I wanted. Now, while appreciated, it felt like too little too late. "I appreciate that, Dad," I said honestly, "but I need you to understand that your approval isn't the deciding factor anymore. I've learned to trust my own judgment and to value the opinions of people who respected my work even when you didn't." He winced slightly at the reminder of his previous dismissal, but nodded in acceptance. "That's probably healthy. You shouldn't need your father's approval to feel confident in your choices." The conversation continued for another hour, covering topics we had avoided for years. My father shared his regrets about how he had handled my mother's death and his subsequent marriage to Patricia. He acknowledged that his grief had made him vulnerable to someone who offered stability, but who didn't share his fundamental values. "Patricia isn't a bad person," he said carefully, "but she comes from a world where appearance matters more than substance. I let her perspective influence mine, and that was a mistake." "What about now?" I asked. "Have things changed between you two?" He was quiet for a long moment before answering. "The party opened my eyes to a lot of things, not just about you, but about the kind of man I want to be. Patricia and I are in counseling, trying to figure out if we can build a relationship based on shared values, rather than just shared social status. The revelation surprised me, though it also explained some of the strain I had noticed in Patricia's demeanor during recent family interactions. She had built her identity around social climbing and status consciousness, so questioning those values would be fundamentally challenging for her. "I hope you can work things out," I said, meaning it despite my complicated feelings toward Patricia. "But I also hope you won't lose sight of your own values again, regardless of what happens with your marriage." "I won't," he promised. "These past weeks have reminded me who I used to be, who I want to be again. The man your mother married. The one who believed that success meant making a positive difference in the world." Before he left that afternoon, my father made one final request. "Sophia, would you consider having dinner with me next week? Just the two of us, no Patricia, no agenda." "I'd like to hear more about your work and your plans for the future." I agreed, though with careful boundaries about what the dinner would and wouldn't represent. This was a beginning, not a resolution. Trust would need to be rebuilt gradually, through consistent actions rather than words alone. The following week brought the deadline for responding to the Rockefeller Foundation's offer. Dr. Williams had arranged a conference call with their leadership team, giving me the opportunity to ask questions about the position's scope and expectations. The conversation was inspiring and intimidating in equal measure. The Foundation's vision for addressing poverty was ambitious and well-funded, with resources that could transform how social services were delivered across the country. They had identified my work as a model for innovation and wanted to give me the platform to influence policy at the highest levels. "We're not just offering you a job," explained Dr. Janet Morrison, the Foundation's president. "We're offering you the chance to shape how America addresses inequality for the next generation. Your programs have demonstrated measurable impact on complex social problems, and we want to scale that impact nationally." The opportunity was everything I had worked toward professionally, but it would require sacrificing the personal connections and community relationships I had built over years of dedicated service. The decision felt impossible, with compelling arguments on both sides. That evening, I met my father for the dinner we had arranged. He had chosen a quiet restaurant where we could talk without interruption, and he listened intently as I described the New York opportunity and my conflicted feelings about the decision. "What does your heart tell you?" he asked when I finished explaining the professional and personal considerations involved. "That's the problem," I replied. "My heart is pulling me in different directions. Professionally, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. Personally, it feels like running away from unfinished business here." "What kind of unfinished business?" he pressed gently. I considered the question carefully before answering. "My relationship with you, for one thing. The programs I've built here. Miguel and our future together. The feeling that leaving now would mean abandoning the community that supported me when my own family didn't." My father was quiet for a long moment, processing my words. Finally, he spoke with a clarity that reminded me of the man he had been before grief and remarriage had clouded his judgment. "Sophia, you've already given this community more than anyone could ask for. You've built programs that will continue helping families long after you're gone. You've trained staff who can carry on your work. And you've proven that innovative approaches to social problems can succeed even in challenging environments. But what about us?" I asked. "What about rebuilding our relationship?" "Our relationship doesn't depend on geography," he replied. "It depends on mutual respect and understanding, which we're already beginning to rebuild. If you stay here because you feel obligated to fix what I broke, you'll resent it eventually. But if you go to New York and take on this incredible challenge, I'll be proud to support you from whatever distance." His words carried a wisdom that had been missing from our interactions for years, reminding me why I had once looked up to him so completely. This was the father who had raised me to believe in my own potential, who had taught me that meaningful work was its own reward. The next morning, I called Dr. Williams to discuss my decision. She listened patiently as I explained my reasoning, offering insights about career progression and the importance of taking calculated risks when extraordinary opportunities arose. "Sophia, I've seen many talented people pass up transformative opportunities because they were comfortable where they were," she said. Some of them regretted it for the rest of their careers. Others found different paths to fulfillment. Only you can decide which choice you can live with. That afternoon, I made my decision. I called the Rockefeller Foundation and accepted their offer, with a start date that would allow me to transition my current responsibilities and train my replacement. The conversation with Dr. Morrison was exhilarating and terrifying, as I committed to a future that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my own capabilities. The hardest conversation was with Miguel, who had been waiting patiently for my decision while preparing himself for either outcome. We met at the coffee shop where we had shared our first date 3 years earlier, the symbolic setting adding weight to what we both knew would be a defining conversation. "I'm taking the position," I told him directly, knowing that delaying the news would only make it more painful. "I leave for New York in 6 weeks. His face showed a mixture of pride and heartbreak that nearly made me reconsider my decision. "I'm happy for you," he said, and I could tell he meant it despite his obvious pain. "This is what you've worked toward your entire career. You have to take it. Come with me," I said impulsively, knowing even as I spoke that it wasn't realistic. "New York has amazing schools, innovative programs. You could make such a difference there." He smiled sadly, shaking his head. "Sophia, my roots are here, my family, my students, the programs I've built at the school. I can't start over the way you can." We both knew he was right, though acknowledging it felt like accepting the end of something beautiful and important. We had built a relationship based on shared values and mutual support, but we couldn't build a future that required one of us to sacrifice everything we had worked to create. "This doesn't have to be forever," I said, though we both knew that career trajectories at this level rarely allowed for easy reversals. "Maybe not," he agreed. "But we can't base our decisions on maybes. You need to go to New York and do incredible work without worrying about what you're leaving behind. And I need to stay here and continue the work I'm passionate about without resenting the fact that you had opportunities I couldn't match." The conversation was painful but necessary, acknowledging the reality that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome fundamental incompatibilities in life direction. We parted with promises to remain friends and mutual respect for the choices we were each making. My last weeks in the city were a whirlwind of transition activities, farewell gatherings, and media interviews about my new role. The local newspaper ran a feature story about my career progression, highlighting the programs I had developed and the impact they had achieved. The article included quotes from families who had been helped by my initiatives, politicians who had worked with me on policy development, and colleagues who described my innovative approaches to persistent social problems. The story prompted an unexpected response from Patricia, who called to request a private meeting. We met at a neutral location, a upscale cafe where she seemed more comfortable than she would have in my apartment, or at any location associated with my work. "I owe you an apology," she began without preamble. "Not just for the birthday party, but for how I've treated you since I married your father. I was wrong to dismiss your work and your choices." The apology was more direct than I had expected, from someone who had seemed incapable of acknowledging error. "Thank you for saying that," I replied carefully. "What changed your mind?" "Therapy," she admitted with obvious discomfort. "Your father insisted we see someone together, and she helped me understand how my own insecurities led me to diminish other people's achievements. I grew up in a world where women were valued primarily for their social connections and their husbands' success. I couldn't understand why you would choose a different path." "And now?" I asked. "Now I see that you achieved something I never could," she said quietly. "You built a career based on your own talents and values, not on who you married or what social circles you belonged to. That takes a kind of courage I've never had." The admission was surprisingly vulnerable, coming from someone I had seen only as critical and status-obsessed. It reminded me that people were more complex than their worst behaviors suggested, capable of growth and change even when it seemed unlikely. "I appreciate you telling me that," I said. "I know it wasn't easy to examine your own motivations and acknowledge mistakes. I hope we can start over when you come back to visit," she said. "I'd like to know the real Sophia, not the version I created in my head to justify my own prejudices." The conversation marked an unexpected turn in our relationship, suggesting that my departure might actually create space for more honest interactions when I returned for family visits. My final week included a farewell reception hosted by the Community Foundation, attended by colleagues, grant recipients, and community leaders who had worked with me over the years. The event was both celebration and send-off, acknowledging achievements while looking forward to continued impact in my new role. Dr. Williams spoke about the legacy I was leaving behind, describing programs that would continue serving families long after my departure. Sophia didn't just develop innovative approaches to social problems, she told the assembled crowd. She created sustainable systems that will adapt and grow to meet changing community needs. The most meaningful moment came when several families I had worked with over the years approached to share how my programs had changed their lives. A single mother described how my housing assistance program had helped her find stable accommodation while she completed nursing school. A veteran talked about how my employment training initiative had given him skills and confidence to re-enter the workforce after struggling with PTSD. "You didn't just help us with immediate problems," one woman said. "You gave us tools to help ourselves and hope for our futures. That's something we'll carry forward forever." Their testimonials reminded me why I had chosen social work in the first place and reinforced my confidence that the New York opportunity would allow me to help even more families achieve stability and self-sufficiency. My father attended the reception, staying quietly in the background but clearly present to show his support. Toward the end of the evening, he approached to offer his final farewell before my departure. "I'm proud of you, Sophia," he said simply. "Not just for this new opportunity, but for everything you've built here. You've become the woman your mother dreamed you would be." The words carried weight because they referenced my mother's hopes rather than just his own belated recognition. They acknowledged that my path had been right all along, even when he had been too blind to see it. "Thank you, Dad," I replied. "That means more than you know." "I'll miss you," he added, his voice catching slightly. "But I'll be following your work and bragging about your achievements to anyone who will listen." 2 days later, I loaded my belongings into a moving truck and began the drive to New York City. As I crossed the city limits, I felt a complex mixture of excitement and sadness, anticipation and loss. I was leaving behind the community where I had grown up and built my career, but I was also moving toward an opportunity that could amplify my impact exponentially. The Rockefeller Foundation office was located in a gleaming Manhattan building that represented resources and influence I had never imagined having access to. My first weeks were intense and challenging, as I learned to navigate federal policy discussions, coordinate with multiple state organizations, and manage budgets that dwarfed anything I had worked with previously. But the core mission remained the same: helping families achieve stability and self-sufficiency through innovative, evidence-based programs. The scale was larger, and the complexity greater, but the fundamental purpose that had driven my career from the beginning continued to motivate and inspire me. 3 months into my new role, I received a package from my father containing newspaper clippings about my work that had been picked up by national media outlets. His accompanying note was brief but meaningful. "Your mother would be so proud. I am too." The simple words represented a complete transformation in our relationship, from dismissal and embarrassment to recognition and pride. It had taken a crisis to force that change, but the outcome felt worth the painful journey we had both endured. 6 months later, when I returned home for a brief visit, the reception was dramatically different from what I had experienced during my final months in the city. My family treated me with genuine respect and interest, asking detailed questions about my work and celebrating my achievements without reservation. The little girl who had once been excluded from her father's birthday party for being too poor and unsuccessful was now welcomed home as a respected professional whose work was making national headlines. The transformation felt surreal, but also deeply satisfying, proving that persistence and integrity eventually triumph over prejudice and narrow-mindedness. Standing in my childhood home, surrounded by family members who finally understood and valued my choices, I realized that sometimes the best way to change people's perceptions is simply to exceed their expectations so dramatically that denial becomes impossible. My success hadn't just vindicated my career choices, it had forced my family to examine their own values and assumptions about what really mattered in life. The journey from rejection to recognition had been painful and sometimes lonely, but it had also taught me invaluable lessons about staying true to my principles, regardless of others' opinions. Most importantly, it had shown me that the right opportunities will find you when you're doing work that truly matters, even when your own family doesn't understand its value. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.